Preston Wade looked me dead in the eye, smiled like he already knew he'd won, and said the sentence that would end up changing everything. "You'll never be more than her spare key." Nate, we were standing in Brooke's kitchen, the one I'd helped pick the cabinet hardware for 8 months earlier, and his voice had that smooth, unbothered confidence of a man who'd never once been told no and meant it. Brooke stood a few feet away, arms crossed, looking between us with an expression I couldn't read. The moss-green pendant light I'd installed over her sink threw warm shadows across all 3 faces. I should have laughed it off. That's what I always did. 6 years of laughing things off, 6 years of being the safe, steady, easy-to-overlook friend who got handed the spare key because somebody needed to water the plants while she was at a wedding in Charleston. 6 years of being useful in exactly the way that made it easy for everyone, including me, to believe that's all I'd ever be. But this time, something in me just stopped laughing. I didn't know it yet. Standing there with sawdust still under my fingernails from a job I'd left early because Brooke called sounding strange. But that one cruel sentence was about to be the reason I finally said something I'd been swallowing for 6 years. Let me back up. Though, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My name is Nathan Cole. Everyone calls me Nate. I'm 29. I run a small contracting crew out of Richmond, Virginia, and most of my days involve hanging cabinets, patching drywall, and listening to homeowners debate paint swatches like the fate of nations hangs on eggshell versus oyster white. My best friend is Brooke Sullivan. She's 28, works as an event coordinator for a boutique firm, and has a gift for walking into an empty room and making it feel like somewhere you'd want to stay. We met in college, in a shared house with terrible plumbing, and somehow 6 years later we were still each other's first call. People assumed we were together more often than either of us bothered correcting anymore. When asked, I'd just smile and say, "No, just friends," and Brooke would roll her eyes and add, "If we were dating, I'd have alphabetized his entire toolbox by now." It felt safe, comfortable, like a jacket you've had so long you stop noticing you're wearing it. Then Brooke signed a lease on a new apartment, a small third-floor unit in a converted warehouse near the river. All exposed brick and big factory windows and floors that needed love but had good bones underneath the scuffs. The day after she got the keys, she called me with no greeting at all. "Nate, I need you to come furniture shopping with me." "Why?" I said. "You have taste." "I have a truck." "Exactly. And you can tell when a table's about to collapse just by looking at it." I pretended to be offended. "I thought you called because you missed me." There was a small pause. "I do. But the truck helps too." That Saturday, I picked her up in my old pickup, and we drove to a sprawling second-hand furniture warehouse on the edge of the city. Brooke moved through the aisles like she was conducting something, choosing pieces with quick, certain instincts. A tall brass floor lamp with a tarnished shade. A solid oak coffee table covered in honest scratches. 2 mismatched dining chairs. A small cabinet with chipped paint she swore had character. When she pointed at a bright yellow armchair, I made a face. "That chair's wobbly." She turned on me instantly. "You only hate it because it's yellow." "I hate it because the legs sound like they're confessing to a crime every time someone sits in it." She laughed, loud and sudden, and for a second the whole warehouse felt warmer. At the register, the owner, a woman in her 50s with kind, tired eyes, glanced between us and smiled the way strangers do when they've spotted something obvious. "Your wife's got great taste," she said to me. I didn't even think about it. "Yeah," I said, grinning. "My wife always wins the furniture arguments," the woman laughed. I laughed too, but Brooke went very still beside me, her face flushed, real color climbing up her neck. She looked down at the receipt like it had become the most interesting document she'd ever held, then turned her face away. When the owner stepped off to get change, Brooke said something so quiet I almost missed it. I wish that wasn't a joke. I froze with one hand still on the cart handle. We loaded everything into the truck mostly in silence. On the drive to her new place, she stared out the window for a long stretch, and I tried, badly, to lighten the air. "My wife's been awfully quiet today," I said, glancing over. She didn't look at me. Her voice came out low and tight. "Don't call me that if you're only joking." My fingers tightened on the wheel. The whole cab seemed to shrink around us. "Brooke, I know," she cut in. "I know you were just joking." She said it like she was trying hard to convince herself it was true. We carried everything up 3 flights of stairs and spent the rest of the afternoon putting the apartment together. I drilled. She handed me screws and corrected my angles with the precision of someone who'd spent 6 years making sure every event detail was flawless. When I finished hanging the bookshelf, she stepped back, crossed her arms, and announced it was crooked. "It's not crooked," I said. "Nate, I plan events for extremely particular, extremely rich people. I know crooked when I see it. I checked it with a level. The bubble sat slightly off-center. She gave me that small, satisfied smirk she gets when she's right. And the strange tension from the furniture store dissolved, at least for a while, into the easy rhythm of hammering and laughing and the smell of fresh-cut wood. By evening, the apartment had shape. The brass lamp glowed warm in the corner. The oak table sat in the middle of the room. The bookshelf stood straight against the brick. It looked like her. Warm, a little unpolished, more beautiful than she ever gave herself credit for. We sat on the floor eating pizza out of the box because the chairs were still covered in plastic wrap. Brooke looked around slowly and said very quietly, "Thank you." "For the truck?" I asked, trying to keep it light. She kept looking at the room. "For being here." The words were small, but they landed somewhere heavy in my chest. I thought about asking what she'd really meant back at the store. But my phone buzzed before I could find the words, my crew lead texting about an early start, and the moment slipped past me the way moments do when you're not paying close enough attention to how rare they actually are. I drove home that night with the windows down, the city lights blurring past, and a strange, heavy feeling sitting low in my stomach, like I'd walked past an open door without realizing it had been open at all. The next few days were quiet in a way that felt wrong. Brooke usually filled my phone with nonsense, photos of weird plants, memes about ugly apartments, late-night texts asking whether her curtains should be cream or gray. After the furniture trip, her replies thinned out to almost nothing. Monday. Did the brass lamp survive the night? 4 hours later. Still alive. Tuesday. Has the bookshelf crushed you yet? Just no would have been fine. One word. No warmth. Nothing that sounded like her at all. I sat in my truck during lunch breaks, replaying the moment at the register, the flush in her cheeks, the whispered confession, the cold edge in her voice on the drive home. I'd meant the comment as a throwaway line to a stranger, but maybe to her it hadn't felt throwaway at all. By Friday, the guilt had settled into something heavier than I knew what to do with. So I did the only thing I know how to do when words feel too risky. I showed up with food. Brooke loved the lemon pepper wings from a place near her old apartment. So I picked up a double order, added garlic knots, and grabbed the peach tea she always drank when she was stressed. I stood outside her door holding the bag and knocked twice. She opened it in a loose cream sweater, hair pulled into a messy knot, and her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. "Nate?" I lifted the bag. "Wings? Your favorite?" Before she could answer, a man's voice drifted out from the living room. "Brooke, who is it?" I looked past her shoulder. A guy was rising off the couch, mid-30s, crisp white button-down, an expensive watch catching the light off the new lamp we'd hung together. He had the look of someone who'd never once carried furniture up 3 flights of stairs. Brooke hesitated, then turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "This is Preston Wade," she said, her voice a little too bright. "My new boyfriend." The bag in my hand suddenly felt much heavier than wings should. "New boyfriend," I repeated. She wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Yeah, we reconnected recently." Preston walked over with a smooth, polished smile. He looked me over in one quick sweep, my work shirt still dusted with drywall, the small cut on my knuckle, my scuffed boots. He extended his hand anyway. "Nate, right? Brooke mentioned you helped her set the place up." I shook it. "Yeah, that's me." He glanced at the bag. "You brought dinner." Thoughtful. But I was actually about to take Brooke out tonight. Brooke looked at me like she wanted to say something and then didn't. I set the bag down on the small table by the door. "No problem. It'll keep." I should have left right then, but Preston glanced around the apartment and said something that made me stop. "This place is cute," he said, "but Brooke really deserves somewhere better than this." Owen told me exactly why I had a bad feeling. Preston had been running the same con for a couple of years under different shell company names, the latest called Wade Urban Realty. He targeted women new to a city, recently single, or just getting back on their feet. He'd show up charming, mention an insider deal on a townhouse, offer to fast-track paperwork through a trusted financing contact, and ask for a sizable, good-faith deposit. Half the properties weren't even his to sell. He sent screenshots of old business cards, warning threads in local real estate groups, and a complaint from a woman who'd lost almost $15,000. The case was still tangled in small claims because his contracts read more like consulting fees than deposits. I stared at my phone for a long time after we hung up. If I brought this to Brooke directly, she'd assume I was making it up out of jealousy. I needed something solid. Sunday afternoon, I drove out to the Maple Hill address Preston had mentioned. Clean streets, young trees, rows of new construction. The townhouse he'd talked about had a real for-sale sign from a legitimate brokerage. No mention anywhere of special financing or Preston Wade. I called the number and pretended to be interested. The agent, Diane, said the unit already had 2 scheduled showings that weekend and had never been part of any private financing program. When I dropped Preston's name, she went quiet. "He's circling again," she said. We met at a coffee shop 20 minutes later. Diane showed me an email exchange from another client Preston had approached the previous year. Same pitch, same manufactured urgency, same deposit that vanished into a shell account. She hadn't been able to press charges because the paperwork was too slippery, but she'd been quietly warning other agents since. "If a friend of mine is being targeted right now, would you confirm it to her face?" I asked. Diane studied me. "Has she given him money yet?" "Not that I know of." "Then you need to move fast." That night I texted Brooke. "I need to talk to you about Preston. It's important." She didn't reply for almost an hour. When she finally did, "Nate, I don't want to hear you badmouth him." I typed back, "I have proof." Nothing. I drove to her apartment anyway, a little after 9. I knocked and waited. Preston opened the door, and the friendly smile he'd worn before vanished the moment he saw my face. "Nate," he said, voice flat. "Not really a good time." I looked past him. Brooke sat at the dining table with a stack of papers, a company logo at the top reading Wade Urban Holdings. My pulse kicked up. I stepped forward anyway. "Brooke!" She looked up, annoyed. "Nate, you can't just keep showing up like this. Did you sign anything yet?" "You need to leave," Preston said, voice icy. I ignored him. "Brooke, have you transferred any money?" She stood, voice tight. "That's none of your business." "I know. But if you haven't, you need to stop right now." Preston laughed once, sharp. "He's jealous, Brooke. He can't stand that you're moving forward with someone who can actually build you a better life." I pulled out my phone and held up Preston's old business card. "Wade Urban Realty. Sound familiar?" I swiped to the complaint file. $15,000. The property wasn't even his to sell. "That was a civil matter," he said, fast and smooth. "Already resolved." I hit play on the recording of my conversation with Diane. Her voice filled the apartment. Calm and clear, confirming the townhouse had never been connected to any financing program run by Preston Wade, and that he'd used the same playbook on multiple women new to the city. Brooke went pale. Preston turned to her, hands raised. "He's pulling a few details completely out of context." I set the documents on the table. "Then call Diane right now. Use the number on the actual sign, not whatever number he gave you." The room went still. Brooke looked at him, then at the papers, then back. "Do it." He didn't move. That was answer enough. "Preston?" she said, voice quiet but shaking. He exhaled, the mask finally cracking. "You're really going to believe some contractor over the guy who's actually trying to get you out of this dump?" Brooke stared like she was seeing him for the first time. "What did you just call him?" "Brooke, I didn't mean—" "Yes," she cut him off. "You did." She tore the contract down the middle, let the pieces fall, and pointed at the door. "Get out of my house." Preston looked at her, jaw tight, then turned to me with contempt. "You think you won?" "No," I said. "I think she didn't lose." She held the door. He grabbed his jacket and walked out. The door closed with a final heavy sound. The apartment was suddenly too quiet. Brooke stared at the torn paper on the floor. The brass lamp still glowed warm in the corner. She turned to me, eyes red. "You were right. I wish I wasn't." She gathered the pieces, carried them to the trash, and let out a long, shaking breath. "I almost gave him money, but you didn't." A bitter laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I almost did, because he looked me in the face and told me I deserved better than this place." I glanced around the apartment. Nothing in here felt second-rate to me. "He wasn't selling you a house," I said. "He was selling you the idea that your life right now isn't good enough yet." And I bought it so fast. Because he hit the exact spot where you're already hurting. She lifted her head. "Do you know where I'm hurting, Nate?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She stepped closer. "I hurt because that day at the furniture store when you called me your wife, I felt happy. Stupidly, ridiculously happy. And then you turned it into a joke again like it was nothing." Her eyes were shining now. Then Preston showed up. He said all the right things at exactly the right time. He made me feel chosen. Not like someone you call your wife and then immediately laugh about. My throat tightened. "Brooke!" "No, let me finish." I stayed quiet. I told myself I was being stupid for reading into it. And then someone else came along and told me I was right to want more. So I almost believed him. I'm sorry, I said. For what? For using a joke to touch something real and then getting scared when you reacted like it mattered. She didn't move. That day at the store, I didn't say my wife because it was funny. I said it because it felt easy. Too easy. And that scared me, so I laughed it off. We've told everyone we're just friends for 6 years. But the truth is, I've been lying to myself longer than that. She stepped closer still. I don't want to be the spare key holder, I said. Standing on the outside of your life pretending that's enough. I want to be the person you call when this apartment breaks and when nothing's broken at all. I want to eat cold wings on the floor with you and argue about lamp colors and still get yelled at for hanging things crooked. I want to call you my wife one day without taking it back 5 seconds later. Her eyes were full now. One tear slid down her cheek. You're really slow, Nate, she whispered. I know. A shaky breath that was almost a laugh. Slow enough that I almost bought a townhouse from a con artist. That's a special kind of slow. I'm embarrassed for both of us. A small, wet smile broke through. She stepped closer and rested her forehead against my chest, right over my heart. I still hate that you were right about him. I wrapped my arms around her. I hate that I was right, too. We stood like that a long minute. After a while, she spoke into my shirt. Are the wings still good? Probably cold by now. I'm hungry. I can heat them up. She pulled back, eyes still red but clearer now. And you're not fixing anything else tonight. I glanced at the window where one curtain hung slightly crooked. Unfortunately, I already noticed the rod is off by ½ an inch. Nate, I raised both hands. Okay, no fixing. I swear. She laughed, small but genuine, and leaned back into my chest. For the first time since that day at the furniture store, the air between us didn't feel full of things we were both too scared to say. Brooke filed a report the next morning. Diane sent everything she had. Owen added what he knew. 2 other women Preston had targeted came forward. He didn't vanish overnight, but the net around him started tightening. Brooke got quiet for a while, not because she missed him, but because being lied to that smoothly makes you question every choice you've made since. I stayed, not with big speeches, just quietly present. I replaced the lock on her door with something stronger. Installed a doorbell camera. Read through her lease line by line. On nights she didn't feel like cooking. I brought wings and sat on the floor with her until she was ready to talk. About 10 days later, she looked at me from across the coffee table and asked, Do you think I'm stupid? No, I said without hesitation. You answered too fast. Because it's an easy question. I spent 6 years pretending I didn't feel anything more than friendship for you. If we're talking about stupid, I don't get to judge anyone. She stared at me, then grabbed the nearest pillow and threw it at my face. That was the first good sign. We never had an official conversation about it. It just started happening. I stayed for dinner more often. She kept one of my old flannels in her closet without asking. I got my own mug in her kitchen that said World's Okayest Handyman. She changed my contact name to Nate Do Not Hang Curtains without asking. A month later, we went back to the same second-hand furniture warehouse. Brooke needed 2 more dining chairs. On the drive there, I told her, I promise I won't say anything stupid. The same woman was working the counter, and when she saw us walk in together, she smiled. Well, look who's back. The brass lamp couple. Brooke turned to me, one eyebrow raised, waiting to see what I'd do. Last time I'd use the word wife like a shield. This time I didn't want to hide behind anything. I looked at the woman and said calmly, Not yet. Brooke went very still beside me. I reached over and took her hand. But I'm working on earning the right to say it without making her mad. The woman laughed warmly. Brooke's cheeks turned pink, but she didn't look away this time. She squeezed my hand under the bright store lights. Back in the apartment, I fixed the wobbly leg on one of the chairs while she sat beside me eating crackers and supervising. Like a very strict site manager. This one's solid now, I said, tightening the last screw. She watched me with that small, knowing smile right before she says something that'll make me roll my eyes. You always say that. You think everything broken can be fixed. Not everything, I said. But the things worth keeping, yeah. Those are worth trying for. She set the crackers down, stood up, and walked over. Then leaned down and kissed me, soft and slow, tasting like crackers, and the quiet kind of certainty that had taken us far too long to reach. When she pulled back, she stayed close, forehead resting against mine. Until you get a ring, she whispered. Noted. She laughed, the sound filling the apartment like warm light. I looked around at the space we'd built together. The slightly crooked bookshelf, the brass lamp, the 2 mismatched chairs. Preston had once called this place a dump she deserved to leave. But standing here with Brooke's hands in mine, I knew the truth. This was the place where we'd almost lost each other, and then finally told the truth instead. People sometimes ask how it started, and I never quite know what to tell them, because the honest answer sounds too small for what it became. It started with me calling her my wife as a joke, her blushing like she'd been hoping to hear it her whole life, and me being too slow to understand what my own heart had already decided months before I caught up. But we got there anyway. And some nights, sitting on the floor of that apartment with wings going cold between us and her laugh filling every corner of the room, I think about the man who told me I'd never be more than a spare key. He wasn't wrong because he was cruel. He was wrong because he didn't understand what a key means to the person who trusts you enough to give you one. It was never about access. It was about being the one person she knew would always show up, however long it took me to admit why.